I never imagined that my own granddaughter's wedding, the happiest day of her life, would also become the most humiliating day of mine. The ballroom glittered with golden chandeliers, dripping with crystal light that scattered across the marble floor. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their violins filling the air with delicate notes of romance. Guests floated about in gowns and tuxedos, their laughter echoing beneath the domed ceiling. It should have been a moment of joy. My granddaughter, my Lily, was about to begin a new life. And I, her grandmother, should have been filled with nothing but pride. And yet, my hands trembled as I adjusted my shawl. My heart raced with a nervous hope. I stood at the entrance, waiting to be welcomed like family. After all, wasn't this my family? The usher, a young man with a polished smile, approached me. "Welcome, ma'am," he said cheerfully, before handing me a small white envelope. Inside it was my name tag, my place among all the others. I pulled it out, expecting to see Grandmother the Bride, printed elegantly in gold, or at least Mrs. Margaret Williams. My name, the name I had carried with dignity through 68 long years of life. But when my eyes landed on the letters, my world froze. It didn't say Grandmother the Bride. It didn't even say Margaret Williams. No, in bold, careless black letters it said, "The old lady who's paying for everything." I stopped breathing. My chest tightened. For a moment, it felt as though the ground had opened beneath me and I was falling into endless darkness. The words didn't just sit on that card. They screamed at me. They mocked me. I looked around, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But the guests around me walked past proudly, their name tags glistening in the light. Best man, bride's cousin, mother the groom, college friend. Every one of them honored, every one of them seen. And me? I was nothing but a walking purse. A label, a transaction, a joke. I clutched the tag in my hand, my fingers shaking. My mind screamed, how could my own family do this to me? After all, I was the one who had sold my jewelry to pay for the flowers. I had emptied my savings for the food. I had even mortgaged my small house, my only home, so Lily could have the fairy tale wedding she dreamed of. And yet, this was how they chose to honor me? Not as a grandmother, not as a mother, not even as a woman with a name. Just the old lady who's paying for everything. I felt a lump rise in my throat. My eyes burned, desperate to release tears. But I refused. Not here. Not now. So I pinned the tag to my chest with trembling hands. I forced my chin up, painted a small smile on my lips, and walked inside. But inside my heart, something changed. Something broke. It was as if years of silent sacrifice, years of bending, giving, and waiting to be seen, suddenly hardened into stone. That was the exact moment I decided this family would never see me the same way again. Not ever. My name is Margaret Williams. I am 68 years old, a widow for nearly 2 decades, and the only thing I ever truly lived for was my family. When my husband passed away, life wasn't easy. In fact, it was brutal. Bills piled up faster than I could count them. I would sit at the kitchen table late at night, staring at envelopes stamped with overdue and angry red letters, wondering how I was going to keep the lights on. My daughter, Susan, was still so young. She needed clothes, books, food, and above all, a chance at a better future. I couldn't let her life collapse just because mine had, so I rolled up my sleeves and took on 2 jobs. During the day, I cleaned houses for wealthier families, polishing floors, scrubbing bathrooms, washing dishes until my fingers pruned. At night, I sat by a dim lamp with my sewing machine, stitching clothes for neighbors. My hands were cracked and raw. My back ached so badly that sometimes I couldn't sleep, but I never complained, because every dollar mattered. Every single coin was another step toward keeping a roof over our heads, another meal on Susan's plate, another book in her school bag. When Susan grew up, I thought she would see it. I thought she would remember the mother who never gave up. She married well, lived in comfort, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to breathe. I thought maybe, finally, I had done enough. And then came my granddaughter, Lily. Oh, Lily! From the very moment she was born, my heart belonged to her. Her tiny fingers curled around mine, and I promised myself I would give her everything I had left. When Susan went to work, I was the one rocking Lily to sleep. When Lily needed new school uniforms, I found a way. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone, I made sure she never felt lacking. I pinched pennies, saved coins in jars, skipped meals sometimes, just to surprise her with the things she dreamed of. People say grandparents spoil their grandkids, but I didn't just spoil Lily. I built her future. I paid into her college fund. I bought her books. I stayed up late helping her study when Susan was too tired or too busy. And as she grew older, she would run into my arms, her laughter like music. "Grandma, you're my best friend," she'd say. And those words healed every wound inside me. So when Lily got engaged, she came to me with those sparkling eyes, her hands clasped in excitement like a child again. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy, "I want a dream wedding, a royal wedding, something that will make everyone talk about it for years." How could I possibly say no? She wasn't just my granddaughter. She was my pride, my hope, my very heart walking around outside my body. I promised her she would have it, the dream wedding she longed for, even if it meant selling my jewelry, even if it meant emptying my savings, even if it meant sacrificing the little comfort I had left in my old age. I told myself they would understand. I told myself they would finally see me, not as a burden, not as a woman who gave too much, but as the backbone of this family. I believed I would finally be honored, but I was wrong, so very wrong, because instead of gratitude, instead of love, they reduced me to a cruel joke on a name tag. As I stepped into the wedding hall with that cruel name tag pinned to my chest, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then the whispers began. "Oh, that's her." A woman in a glittering blue dress giggled to her friend, her hand covering her mouth. "The old lady who's paying for everything." Another man, holding a glass of champagne, smirked. "Well, at least she's useful for something." The word stabbed at me, sharper than any knife. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. My heart screamed, but my lips stayed sealed. I walked slowly, each step heavier than the last, until I reached my assigned table. And that's when another wound opened. I wasn't seated near the bride and groom, not near my daughter, not even near the front. No, my seat was tucked away at the very back of the room, behind distant relatives who barely remember my name. People who looked at me with polite smiles but eyes full of pity, as if I were nothing more than an old woman desperate to belong. I lowered myself into the chair, my knees aching, and sat in silence. From that corner, I watched the room sparkle. I watched laughter ripple through the tables, watched glasses clink, and watched the two families celebrate as if I weren't even there. My eyes found Lily. My Lily. She was breathtaking in her white gown, her hair shining like gold under the lights. She looked so radiant, so alive, my granddaughter, my little girl. But as I sat there, quietly hoping she would turn, that she would meet my eyes and give me even the smallest smile, I realized something that cut deeper than all the whispers. She never once looked my way. Not once. It was as if I didn't exist. The pain was unbearable. For years, I had been her shadow, her safety net, her constant supporter. And now, on the most important day of her life, I was invisible. Then came the speeches. Her mother, my daughter, Susan, stood proudly at the microphone. She smiled wide, her voice confident as she thanked everyone who made this day possible. She mentioned her husband, her in-laws, the bridesmaids, the wedding planner, even the florist. But not me, not a single word for the woman who had sacrificed everything. I sat frozen, my chest tightening with each name she listed. I whispered to myself, "Say my name, please, just once." But she didn't. And then the groom stood up. He raised his glass, his face smug, his arm draped casually around my granddaughter. He cleared his throat and said with a mocking grin, "And of course, a special thanks to the old lady who paid for all of this." The words echoed like thunder in my ears. And then the laughter. The whole room erupted. Glasses clinked. People slapped each other's backs, and laughter filled every corner of that glittering hall. Laughter at my expense. I sat there, frozen. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the music anymore. My cheeks burned hot, shame flooding through me like fire. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up, tear off the name tag, and shout the truth until their laughter died in their throats. But I didn't. I stayed silent, because in that moment, something inside me shifted forever. I realized something important. They had taken me for granted for too long. They had fed off my sacrifices like vultures, never once looking back, never once saying thank you. They thought I was weak. They thought I was voiceless. They thought I was easy to use, easy to dismiss, easy to forget. But they were wrong, terribly wrong, because sitting there in silence, humiliated in front of everyone, I felt something stronger than shame rising inside me. I felt resolve. And in that moment, I knew they had no idea what I was capable of. That night, I set the name tag on my kitchen table like an accusation and sat across from it as if waiting for an answer. The house was quiet. Tick of the clock, hum of the old refrigerator. The same home that had held my laughter and my worries for decades. I turned the little card over and over my fingers, feeling the cheap paper, the stubborn black letters. They mocked me. They reduced my life to a punchline. But instead of the flood of tears I expected, something else rose up, a calm that had the sharp edge of a promise. I felt a heat under my ribs, steady and slow, not the hot, blind anger that breaks things, but clear, cold fire that planned. For years I had given, and given, and given. My hands had given, my time had given, my dreams had given. They had taken with polite smiles, with entitled words, with a careless assumption that I would always be there to step in and fill the gaps. They believed my giving required no gratitude. They believed I would accept being made small. It was time for that to end. I went to my little drawer where I kept the papers that mattered, my will, the deed to the small house on Maple Street, the stacks of bank statements that mapped a life of steady, quiet saving. For 68 years, I had been careful. I had tucked away pennies for rainy days, for medicine, for that imagined slow, soft old age. Those pennies had become a modest fund that could change someone's life. All of those papers had, until that night, been earmarked for Susan and Lily, everything I owned in their name. The thought made my mouth go dry. Why should they inherit the fruits of a life they cannot honor? Why should my last gift be another opportunity for them to forget me? A thought formed. Not cruel, not petty, practical, fair. I would give, but not to them. I reached for the telephone and dialed the number of my lawyer, a careful man with a kind voice who had helped my husband years ago. I told him I wanted to make changes, and I asked him to come by the next day. I did not explain on the phone. There was no need. My voice did not tremble. It was steady, like steel wrapped in silk. All through the night I planned. Not the wild, shout in the street kind of plan. This was a quiet plan, measured and final. I would redirect my assets to places that gave real shelter. The women's shelter 2 towns over. The little orphanage where the headmistress still remembered my late husband's small kindness. The scholarship fund at the community college for girls who had no one to back their dreams. I made a list. I crossed names off. I underlined others twice. But I knew that simply changing the will and sending the papers away would not be enough. They needed to see what they had lost. They needed to feel the consequence of having turned my life into an afterthought. I wanted them to understand, not so I could punish them, but so they could learn, so they could look in the mirror and see the cost of their indifference. So I thought about how to reveal it. It had to be undeniable. No whispered letters, no quiet emails. It had to be a moment that matched the scale of their thoughtlessness. A private phone call would be ignored. A note pinned to a door would be brushed aside. But a gathering, a family meeting with witnesses, would make them face the truth. The lawyer reading my decision aloud. Their shocked faces. The sound of silence where laughter used to live. I pictured it exactly. A Saturday afternoon, sunlight to the curtains, all of them seated in my living room expecting some eternal kindness. The lawyer, composed, unfolding the paper. The words read slowly, carefully, and then silence, questions, denials, begging, a truth that could not be swallowed back down.